The value of the post-up has been a point of contention all season, but it really burst into the national conversation a few weeks ago after the Spurs Mavericks game, when Coach Rick Carlisle laid bare his thoughts on the play.
Post-up's not a good play anymore. It's just not a good play. It's not a good play for a 7-3 guy. It's a low-value situation.
The question was prompted by some former players' long-running criticism of today's bigs, and of Kristaps Porzingis in particular during that very game, for not making a living in the post. And Carlisle's thoughtful but slightly piqued response led to some in-depth and detailed breakdowns from some of the smartest people in the business. Links to each are in the description, you should check them out. I'm not going to try to regurgitate or critique their analysis here, but I do think it's important to contextualize the key arguments. And since this is a Spurs channel, we'll do that within the Spurs offense. So without further ado, let's take a look at how the silver and black use the post-up, and more importantly, why. Despite employing LaMarcus Aldridge, who has posted up more than all but one other player in the league, the Spurs only finish about 8% of their possessions with a post-up, per synergy data available on NBA.com. For comparison's sake, that's less than a third as often as they finish a possession with one of the two players in a pick and roll. In terms of efficiency, the Spurs score about 0.94 points per possession they finish with a post-up. That's the 9th highest number in the league, but it's also significantly less than the Spurs' average offensive possession, which has been worth a little over 1.1 points so far this season. So the question has to be asked, if the post-up is such a below-average proposition, why do the Spurs continue to run it? Well, there are several answers, but before we get to those, the first thing we need to do is frame the question in a more appropriate manner. Comparing the Spurs' average points per possession to what they get when they finish a play with a post-up is nonsense, because the first number includes transition, easily the most efficient way for most teams to finish a play and second chances, while the second number obviously doesn't. Anyone who does this as a way to criticize the post-up, or any other play type, is being disingenuous at best. A better number to use for considering the efficacy of the post is the value of a team's average half-court play. Thanks to cleaning the glass, we know the Spurs have scored about 0.96 points per half-court play outside of garbage time this year, which is a little more than what they score when they finish a play with a post-up, but not so much as to be outrageous. The next thing we have to do is consider what the synergy numbers are measuring and what they aren't. The key is in the description, how the play is finished, which means that even though each possession typically has multiple play types, only the one that ends the possession gets credit. So a post-up that leads to a kick out for an open three counts as a spot-up, and one that finds a cutter for an easy layup is a cut, even though the post-up is responsible for creating that opportunity in the first place. As we consider how the Spurs use the post-up, we're going to pay specific attention to all those little bits of value that the synergy numbers can't capture. Now, at the most basic level, the post-up is just a means to put pressure on the defense. Like the pick and roll, cuts, softball screens, and movement, and any number of other actions, the intent is to compromise the defense, either by generating a high-quality shot for the player executing the action, or by forcing the defense to react in a way that creates an opening elsewhere. Like every action, how effective the post-up is in that goal depends in large part on how it's employed, and the Spurs post-ups come in a myriad of shapes and sizes. By far, the most effective and efficient opportunities they get involve quickly attacking the defense before it can settle in and focus on the post. LaMarcus Aldridge gets a deep seal like this once or twice a game, either by beating his man down the floor or taking advantage of an opening within the offense. These are essentially automatic buckets, so they often result in quick fouls, meaning they don't show up in play type data unless the Spurs are already in the bonus. Even zealots would admit these are good possessions. The same is true of DeMar DeRozan attacking a smaller guard on the block in early offense, which I've already done a whole video on. There is little opponents can do except send help. DeMar is too strong and his footwork is way too good for smaller players to keep him away from the rim by themselves. And these possessions are a key reason DeMar is averaging 1.04 points per possession on post-ups, one of the best marks in the league. As with LaMarcus's deep seals, the only real solution is to get back on defense and not get caught out of position. When the defense is set, and especially when the play takes too long to get set up, the post-up becomes much less valuable, and unfortunately, this is where we find some of the Spurs' absolute worst offensive possessions. While nobody wants to watch this, not even Charles Barkley, this is the kind of possession that happens when you become intent on feeding the post with no regard for the situation. indiscriminately throwing it down to the block in today's NBA, with defenses taking advantage of all the rules that make interior play so challenging, is a recipe for long possessions that produce difficult shots. When people say the post-up is dead, this is what they mean. The idea of throwing it into a big man who goes one-on-one against the opponent's best post defender and produces a quality look is largely gone from today's NBA. For good reason. Settling for a contested turnaround jumper, even from LaMarcus, several times a night is a bad outcome. The Spurs are actually better off when they flow right into a post-up, with little or no setup at all. With decent position early, there's enough time on the clock to work the defense a little, and even good post defenders and good team defenses will struggle to hold up against LaMarcus for 10 to 15 seconds. That's more time to probe, more time for off-ball movement and cutters, and more time to draw in a double team, all of which help turn the play into a more effective tool. That time-related flexibility is one of the keys to using the post-up efficiently. These possessions, especially when they're able to draw a double team early in the clock, create opportunities for the team's other players to attack a defense that is out of position with cuts, relocations, and dribble drives that would not otherwise have been available. And when the Spurs get LaMarcus established in good position or with a mismatch, he is deadly. There's a reason teams send help on post-ups. It's simple. They believe that if they don't, the post-up player will generate a high-quality look or draw a foul. And if they show or bring help, they can take that away without giving up something more valuable elsewhere. The .91 points per possession LaMarcus scores when using a post-up isn't great, but if teams didn't bend their defenses towards him, that number would be quite a bit higher. It doesn't help that Spurs have struggled to attack double teams, in part because LaMarcus isn't a great passer, and also because they rarely have more than one or two shooters on the floor. But forcing the defense to shift and rotate like this is inherently valuable, even if they still have room for improvement in how they exploit the opportunity.
Fast break points per game. Patty Mills in the left hand. Strong. And
Kevin Durant's gone.
I think it's a little different.
Yeah.
Recently though, they've done a much better job of executing out of the double team, and if that continues, LaMarcus in the post will be much more dangerous.
In the open court, if he gets the ball near the basket and he's got a point of steam, he's going to throw it down. And
the Spurs also post DeMar and Rudy Gay in the half court, though not nearly as often. Rudy's .79 points per possession when using a post-up is easily the worst of the three, but both he and DeMar are better passers than LaMarcus. DeMar especially is incredible at facilitating out of the post. When he draws help, he will almost always hit the open man, though he's aided by the fact that since he's on the block, there's more shooting around his post-ups than LaMarcus pretty much ever gets.
Bucket went to Westbrook. Aldridge for three.
One last thing the Spurs use the post-up for is to punish switches. If LaMarcus can get a small pin down low, the defense has to give him its full attention. Though again, that's not something the Spurs have been particularly good at exploiting, it's definitely better than a straight-up isolation.
Gay brings it back for the Spurs. 5.5 to go first quarter. Covington on LA. He finds DeRozan.
But perhaps the most valuable aspect of the Spurs post-ups is how they leverage the defense's attention against it. Since their opponents work so hard to take the post-up away, there are often cracks that can be exploited. The Spurs, along with a bunch of other teams, run this play, called Milwaukee, where LaMarcus rolls out of the lead screen in a double drag, over a back screen down to the block. Defenses are often so concerned with preventing LaMarcus from getting deep position that his defender runs straight from the back screen to the block, unwittingly giving up an easy 2 points at the rim. The Spurs also use how defenses defend LaMarcus's post-ups to free up some easy baseline drives for their ball handlers, which forces weak side help to protect the rim and frees up shooters along the arc.
man is, if you're guard even, you've got to pick up Valanciunas early.
DeRozan looking for an opening. Lyles got it for three, and Trey Lyles.
And quite famously, the Spurs will dial up a hammer screen on the weak side of a post-up for an open corner three.
Rudy Gay with the basketball now. Mills, corner three. Patty off the mark.
That's needed that score on the last trip down the floor.
No question about that. San Antonio scored 6 straight.
Now that's just a handful of examples, and there are plenty more. so this isn't quite a complete breakdown of all the way the Spurs leveraged the post-up, but it's pretty close. Now back to the numbers. Remember, the Spurs are averaging .961 points per play in the half court, and synergy tracking has them at .94 points per possession they finish with a post-up. So in order to prepare for this video, I charted every play the Spurs ran over the last 10 games, looking specifically at what the team ran as their primary action or leveraged to create an opportunity elsewhere on each play. The Spurs offense was white-hot liquid fire for most of this period, so all the numbers look a little better than a longer sample would produce. But they're still interesting. 10 games obviously isn't nearly enough to assign a value to any action, and it's worth mentioning that the Spurs' best offensive possessions chain multiple actions together, with plays that include the threat of post-ups, dribble handoffs, pick and rolls, and cuts all rolled into one. Actually using the post-up makes those plays just a little more effective. But leaving those aside for now, the Spurs worked through the post as their primary action in the half court on 149 plays in those 10 games, or about 19% of their total offensive possessions. They scored 166 points on those plays, which is about 1.05 points per play. Given the small sample size, there's obviously a ton of room for a couple of made or missed shots to throw the numbers off one way or the other. But at least over those 10 games, the Spurs' post-up possessions produced close to the same value as their other most common actions, just behind the pick and pop, which is remarkable given how LaMarcus has been shooting from three. But that makes a lot more sense when you consider that the value of the post-up is really a combination of how they finish from the post and the value of all the other opportunities, like cuts, driving lanes, and spot-ups, that it creates. That calculus would probably be a lot different if the Spurs didn't have LaMarcus Aldridge or DeMar DeRozan. By the same token, if they had a player like Luka Doncic or James Harden, there's no question that taking the ball away from a perimeter superstar to throw it into the post would be a poor decision. But at least for the Spurs, the post-up doesn't appear to be, in and of itself, a bad action. The post-up isn't dead, it's just different. There's fat to be trimmed, sure, some bad possessions that go nowhere, which could easily be excised. But that's more a matter of optimization than an actual issue with the team's offensive ecosystem. It's important to remember that the team's offense has to match the talent on hand. Okay, you can yell at me about how wrong I am in the comments, but you still gotta like, subscribe, and share this with your friends so they can yell at me too. Thanks for watching.